Good afternoon, folks. It's Carly from the DIA speaking to you live and direct. And as you can tell, not having had very much time since I was at my desk very early this morning to deal with the chaos that is ensuing today from DVSA's decision making, or rather the minister's announcements, to put on any slap or put on any decent clothes. So please excuse my appearance. I think it's more important for me to come in here and have a chat to you direct rather than worry what I look like on here. Clearly, you will be aware, or should be aware, if you haven't had chance to look at your emails through colleagues who might have alerted you to the issue, that an announcement has been made today by the Parliamentary Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander, that she has a new set of plans to deal with the test waiting times crisis. We are probably into our fifth plan to tackle the issues now. So yesterday it was announced that Loveday Ryder would be stepping down from her role. That's not an entirely unexpected thing to happen, having navigated the extremely choppy waters of post-COVID and the hangover of lockdown and trying to steer the agency through those waters to some degree. Many will argue not very successfully. It was an expectation from many in the industry that at some point, one of the solutions to the problem of test waiting times and DVSA service delivery overall was that the CEO would either walk or be forced to walk the plank. So that is not a surprise to us at all at that announcement yesterday. However, what is surprising today is to have the consultation of which we were asked as an industry to input into have already triggered decisions which, in all honesty, and if they all are honest, the stakeholders involved, as in the ministers and DVSA, have not come back and consulted on those results with the industry in any way. For them to announce to everybody at the same time some pretty staggering developments and not communicate to the big stakeholder bodies in the world of driver training ahead of time is showing you just what panic knee-jerk measures are actually starting to occur here. Because on Monday, when we had our National Association Strategic Partnership meeting, which is exactly the forum of which you should be discussing these kind of issues with your big stakeholder bodies, and is designed for that purpose, to have that conversation and work out what the likely impacts are going to be, the likely responses, how can DVSA communicate better to the wider public about these issues and the wider industry. You would have expected this kind of announcement would have been, previewed there and have that conversation, and that didn't happen. So we can see there's a degree of rushing things out here, not really thinking things through. And that consultation response we were previously promised would be discussed with the industry before it was made more public, and it just hasn't been. I can see we have an administration under pressure on many fronts here to solve some of the problems of which they have been responsible making, let's face it. But that you shouldn't be making worse decisions as a result of those. And if you certainly are going to be making decisions that are going to impact somebody who is paying you a considerable fee over time for their ADI license, you would expect that you would actually talk to that customer as part of your consultation. Now, the argument will be, well, we consulted with you, we ran that consultation, and that was your chance to have your say. Yes, but sensible organisations will then take those consultation results, realise that actually the balance of respondents to that consultation was over 100,000 members of the public, as in non-driver training, driver education professionals. Absolute novices, more so than a newly licensed driver in many respects, in the field of driver education. So that was the balance of the respondents to the public consultation, was the public itself, as in learners and their parents and other interested members of the public who wanted to have their say. It was disappointing that we as an industry didn't have more than a say, although it's heavily promoted by DVSA, DIA and whatever. There was actually only around about 6,000 responses out of a register of over 40,000 people who responded. So this is a little bit of a kick up the bum, people, that when there is a consultation, we need to be there in more numbers than we were on this one. However, again, going back to the concept of a sensible institution or a sensible set of decision makers, a sensible person, like I have several times since they have told me the numbers of respondents on this consultation would say, hang on a minute, we've got to be careful with the balance of respondents here. If we have over 100,000 members of the public who, to some degree, you can argue, really don't know what they're talking about and only want what they want without any regard for how this affects ADIs and road safety in general and the development and safety of pupils, you're going to give those people the balance of opinion and the weight of opinion on decision making going forward. But you're not going to give that to the driver training professionals who are at the coalface of all this decision making and will feel the impact the most sharply. So that is one thing that has gone, for my money, completely wrong with the last 24 hours. That you had a consultation, you promised to consult with the big stakeholders in the industry on the results of that, and you haven't. You've just announced it to everybody, and you've already made your decisions from that consultation without consulting with anybody further in deeper ways than just a survey. And you've allowed the balance of those novice public stakeholders who know very little about the impacts, as I said before, and what this is going to mean for road safety risk and the risk to driving instructors in terms of what they will have to do in a new regime. You've let them make the decision for you because you're more keen to please that electorate that you think is so important to you right now, more so than road safety, than you are to worry about those bigger picture issues that you would have had more knowledge of if you'd have spoken to the sector first before you went out with those announcements. So we are very disappointed how communications have been handled today. We're not sure what the answer is to that. They felt that they had to put something out very quickly, and that meant they just basically leapfrogged the main consultative bodies in the space. It makes a mockery of that consultation process in many ways. And even their own comms people have been caught behind on this one as well, and having to deal with very angry stakeholders like us right now, as well as their job of dealing with all the journalists and everybody else who wants a piece of them on this particular matter. We are trying to process and catch up on things. There are organisations, by the way, who are already out there on Facebook saying, don't worry, ADI industry, we got your back. We're going to a meeting tomorrow. We're going to ask all the questions. No. DVSA have just briefed me that they will not be going into a Q&A session with us tomorrow as stakeholders. They actually won't be able to give us that much more information on the announcement that we've already had. They're actually going to be asking us what the response has been from our members. So if you do see posts from Have a Go Heroes with their cakes flying behind them tonight, that they are going in there to give DVSA a piece of their mind tomorrow and get all the questions answered so they can communicate them to you afterwards, that is not what that meeting is going to be about. So don't get people's hopes up when you can't deliver on those expectations. So we are trying to endeavour to find out as much as we can about whether there will be a proper meeting to discuss the impacts of this, because tomorrow is just a briefing and it's just for them to get a litmus from us what people are saying out there. That's been very clearly communicated to me this afternoon. We now want a meeting with ministers to discuss this decision-making process in itself and discuss the real impacts on the real people who are going to have to deal with these impacts in the driver training industry, because I think the engagement from ministers has been poor at best so far, and it's been PR that has no depth and no gravitas and no delivery. And I can say that from somebody who was in communications advising people like ministers for over 25 years. This is one of the worst handlings of these kind of issues that I've actually seen in my career. There should have been that discussion with the industry before this announcement went out to the wider world. Because if they had had that opportunity and made that opportunity for themselves, or if they'd been having a regular dialogue with the organisations that do actually represent a significant number of ADIs, they would have had a better understanding of what the impact of this decision making is going to be in real terms. So what I'm just saying in this video is I'm not going to give you much more information than what we've got already. I'm saying, please keep telling us what you think of what's happened in the last 24 hours. We do have Motormouth tonight where we're going to have a discussion of these issues clearly, but the more you can feed back to us, the more your points, and we can raise those in that eventual discussion that I hope to get. Please put pressure on your local MPs to be asking the questions that you are asking right now. And appraising them of the impacts of this decision-making process. Some of you have already written to us today, and you've been raising things like, if this is the magic solution, then why is it taking the sudden departure of the DVSA CEO to announce this? It feels all very rushed. ADIs losing the OBS access damages their ability to control their business. So it's putting more burdens on ADIs. You're going to get candidates just coming to you and saying, I've got this slot, get me ready for it. Losing test swapping between candidates has been the only way that ADIs have been able to cope with the current situation. Intensive courses, that's really going to impact those guys. And because if you're booking lessons and tests together, that has really limited the ability of look, you can have your argument about whether you agree with intensive courses or not. They have their place for certain types of client, but it is sad that our businesses are going by the wayside in that particular segment of our industry because of the test situation, and more so now. I have a view that if you are more focused on allowing the public into a system that already has a problem, that because it's public facing, the bots can get into it very easy, by shutting out the professionals, you are not solving the bot issue. And there was a cybersecurity expert earlier this year on behalf of news.co.uk, a journalist there who was investigating the whole test waiting time, who had a look at the DVSA booking system from a cybersecurity point of view and said there were a few more fixes than DVSA have ever attempted to make to keep out the bots that they could try, that were very easy and very manageable, and they couldn't understand why DVSA weren't trying any of those things. So we're taking very radical steps here that have very wide-ranging consequences for road safety, for approved driving instructors, for the public, but they just don't realise it yet, when actually you could have taken some other cybersecurity measures that are much more easy to implement and have far more positive impact than they have negative impact. DVSA, in my view as well, is, and it's shared by some ADIs who are writing to me right now, DVSA puts an enormous amount of pressure and has a campaign out there which is all about telling ADIs to make damn well sure your pupil is ready for test. But now we're going to have a scenario of ADIs being faced with pupils demanding they are got to test standard in very short timescales if that pupil's managed to get a test very quickly, or unreasonable working timescales for these kind of things. So I mean the only gift in all of this is it's pupils are still going to struggle, even if they're the only people in the system booking it, to get slots in a timely manner. But ADIs should be the gatekeeper to the test. They really should be. If you're going to bother having a regulatory system that you require people to pay into to become regulated, and you insist that that's a good thing, then why are you allowing a scenario where it is not mandatory to use those people for training at all? And you're not even having the quasi-mandate of having to use those people because they'll get you a driving test. It is my view, and many of you may not agree with me, that actually the booking system should have been closed down to one entity, and that entity should have been ADIs. The ADIs should have been the only people allowed to book tests, because then you can really say you've got an effective, qualified, expert, and experienced person as a gatekeeper to whether somebody should go for a test or not. Now, I know we have people out there. I was on BBC Breakfast yesterday talking about fraudulent instructors, people who really shouldn't be teaching people to drive, but they wouldn't be able to get into the system in that scenario because they aren't an ADI, they aren't a regulated person. We also know there are quality issues with some ADIs, and some ADIs aren't acting necessarily appropriately when it comes to booking tests. We can't, though, not allow ADIs to be the gatekeeper because there's a small percentage who won't take that responsibility responsibly. We have to think of the 80% that actually would do that in a responsible manner and would be responsible at gatekeepers, rather than not doing something positive such as that because we're worried about a tiny minority who will corrupt the system. If we were always worried about a tiny minority that will try and cheat and corrupt a system, we wouldn't have many of the formal processes in place, like passports, driving license, driving tests in place at all. So it's not an argument to say we can't trust some ADIs to be the only people booking it, but we trust the public more. That's what we said today. We trust mum and dad and novice driver stroke learner pupil, no idea of what it takes to learn to drive, to make the decision about when they are ready to book a driving test. That's what we have done today. We've decided that they are more informed and should be the people who make that decision. Now, you can argue you are the representative of a membership body, Carly. Of course, you're going to say things that are in favour of ADIs controlling the process. But I'm not an ADI. And I do actually, hand on heart, approach this entire scenario with, isn't it just ludicrous if we think about it? We get approved driving instructors to pay to be trained, to be a regulated professional, to then pay for that license, and then they have no real support after that from the regulator who they're paying a fee to be used as that regulated professional. Furthermore, DVSA then also goes off and endorse organisations to deliver driver training who don't actually use approved driving trainers. They use people who basically just fancy doing a bit of Sunday driving tuition. So it is a ridiculous scenario, whether you're in the industry or you're not in the industry. And I've spoken to friends who maybe were a bit ignorant as parents about the whole learning to drive scenario and said, what do you think of a system that insists that anybody who wants to teach driving for a fee has to go through this regulated training program and go on a register and be subject to all these checks and all this training, but then there's no real mandate for you to use them. You could actually just teach them yourself with your lack of knowledge, lack of skill, lack of regulation to know what you're doing properly. And then you and your pupil can then just decide to go for tests whenever you want to do that. And people think it's ridiculous when they think about it like that. And it is ridiculous if we do think about it. And today, we have made it more ridiculous that we do actually have a licensing and regulation system for approved driving instructors, because we're not using them as the gatekeepers to going on the road as a newly licensed independent driver than we should be. So I think this is very problematic, how it's been communicated and what the decisions are. And it is all very last minute and panicky and not thought through and not consulted on properly, because I do not believe in that consultation that took place. And I do not believe a fair balance has been made between just having a mass volume of uneducated decision makers making that decision for you and not spending more time with the lower volume of professionals who you should really be speaking to really understand the impacts of this whole scenario. So if you haven't already registered, join us for Motormouth that is going out at 6:30 tonight, because we'll obviously be focusing on that discussion in Motormouth. It is our no holds barred conversational piece. Also, I know that it looks like a massive plug for the conference, but I will point out this. The DIA National Conference in December, on December the 5th, is the last major ADI event of 2025. And it is going to be the last opportunity for ADIs to see DVSA stood in front of them speaking about their remit and why they're making the decisions they're making decisions at the moment. So if you do want to be heard by the DVSA, then it's a chance for you to do that by buying a ticket to the conference, because we do have a half an hour, which I probably think is going to be a much longer slot now at the conference, which we are known for at our conference, always allowing ADIs to speak and put their questions and their thoughts directly to the DVSA decision makers. And now that won't be Loveday Ryder, but they are sending somebody who I have worked with over a number of years at DFT and DVSA, who I do believe does listen, and other members of the senior management team to listen to it. And I think they will be very much in listening mode at this conference, because this is one of the last events of the year that DVSA will be appearing at and having to face up to ADIs who are very frustrated by this entire situation. So, yeah, it's a sales pitch, but I'm making no apologies for it, because actually the lack of having your voice heard, some of you by your own hand, by not responding to the public consultation, is one of the problems that we have in this decision-making chain at the moment with DVSA. I will be obviously attending a briefing meeting with DVSA that's been cobbled together at the last minute. I would hold your horses on who and what you are hearing from that meeting, because obviously as a major national association, the largest in the space, and a professional body run by professionals, we take our time to consider what our responses are going to be, and we listen to members first about that. We are not just rushing communications out now, making you promises about what we are going to do and say. I will not do that. However, we will communicate back what we think we are going to be able to tell you from that meeting tomorrow. But I have been clearly briefed that it's more for them to ask us how this has hit, for them to give us any more flesh on the bones of this decision making. So manage your expectations, however much somebody is trying to tell you that they are going to deliver on something bigger for you. Okay, that's all I have for now, folks. I've got to dash and try and catch up on press interview requests that I'm being asked to go to today with the BBC and other media outlets. So expect you might see me somewhere else today on a screen. I will try and do my best to communicate your thoughts on this position. So please keep your emails coming to support@driving.org, help@driving.org, or onto our socials as well. And we will do our best to convey those to the powers that are making the decisions at the moment, however questionable those decisions are and however poorly communicated they have been.